Hello, and welcome to episode 0 of Oceanic Orations. I'm your host, the local resident sea creature, also known as NessieD, and I will be hoisting the sails on this nautical adventure. I've been given an ample opportunity to begin a mini-series courtesy of the Comfy Couch podcast team, with specific credit to Catbit. He was interested in giving me a chance to work on my own editorial sister show, which I will go into a bit more detail later. I would also like to thank SmurfDrip on Twitter for the lovely new banner and logo for this mini podcast. As of this recording, he's currently open for commission work, so if you're in need of any rebranding, he's your guy. And lastly, well, you. Yes, you, listening to me at this very moment, right now. You're contributing already just by listening to me, and as I attempt to get this podcast off the ground, I want to thank you for at least having a passing interest. And with that, well, let's go hoist anchor. Now, to start things off, this show will consist of various topics that I have been interested in, general observations, a few how-tos, and taking a look at concepts from as much of an unbiased viewpoint as I can be. There will be times where I discuss pet peeves I have encountered, and those I will certainly do my best to keep you entertained by them, as a number of them cause me to become very opinionated, so to speak. But what I hope for is to give you insight into things you may not have considered about before, to give you a different perspective on things in the hope that maybe you just might learn something new. I'll also attempt to keep this mini-series to about a half hour or so, unless there's a topic I feel may require more time to discuss, or I have more information to share about a topic with, whether through my own personal experiences or through cited sources I've done research on, as I feel as I'm able to provide sources as clearly on the Comfy Couch podcast as I would, say, on my own show. Now, a bit about myself. I consider myself to be a digital cartoonist and illustrator. Most of the characters and scenery you'll see as placeholders were completed by myself, with the exception of the design work. That was, once again, provided by the fantastic SmurfDrip. As for myself, I've been doing digital art for well over a decade, and have been drawing in general for almost 2. I also have varying experience in graphic design, photography, fine arts, and animation respectively, but again, my specialty I feel is in illustrations and cartoon art. I've also considered myself to be a member of the furry fandom for over a decade as well, which is also the reasoning behind the beach aesthetic you're experiencing as you're listening. See, for the entirety of my life, I've always resided near the ocean. To be honest, I can't really see myself being able to live in any other climate. It's home for me. So much so that in all my residencies, the places I've lived I mean, I've always had some amount of nautical decor to it. If I ever go a summer without visiting an ocean once, it'll have been all for naught. Plus, think about it. We have this life-sustaining fluid that keeps almost everything on this planet alive. It can create and destroy, and yet it's beautiful and mysterious all at once. Think about all the sea life we discovered, and have yet to discover. All the battles and wars waged, some we may never even know about. All the stories and tales told about it, and what secrets it holds. Some cultures even revere and deify the ocean, and I think that's pretty astounding. Being much younger myself, my parents would always take me to the beach, and I would just dash into the water. You couldn't get me out of there for hours at a time. The viscosity of your movement, the ebb and flow of the waves, it was all, in a sense, pretty hypnotic for the senses. There's still times where I do miss floating out in salt water under a warm summer sky, you know what I mean? I suppose a lot of it must have carried over as I matured over the years. After being introduced to the fandom by a now ex, a sea serpent felt like a perfect fit for me, as not only do I feel closely associated to water, but I've always had a love of mythical creatures and all things medieval and Celtic fantasy in general. Fairies, giants, witches, griffins, and a sea serpent kind of felt like a happy medium of the two. See, it all started the last day of winter break over a decade ago, as of this episode. I was introduced to a furry art website where not only many talented artists were being showcased, but it was art that I wanted to emulate myself, most of whom to this day I still follow on other social media platforms. I won't highlight them all here, as I may do a whole episode showcasing some of my favorite artists in the future. Anyway, they all had one thing in common: an avatar, usually an anthropomorphic animal version of themselves. Now, up until this point, I haven't ever really associated with one particular animal. Were there rules to this? Was there one species too overrated over another? Really strange. I gotta think about this. So later that evening, I did some more digging, all while thinking, what animal could best represent, well, me? I had never really pondered up until this point. Let's see what other people have done. A wolf? No, too common. Bear? Not really my thing right now. Tortoise? Well, definitely an interesting choice, but not for me. A dragon? Huh. I guess mythical creatures could count as a persona, but what kind? I don't know. Dragons seem a bit too overpowered. I gotta think about this. Suddenly my mom had called me in for something. To this day, I honestly couldn't tell you what it was for, but I did take a notice to all of the nautical decor in not only her room, but just in the house in general. Now, if only I could figure out what my persona should... Wait a minute. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, that's it. Maybe not a dragon, but what about a sea serpent? Yeah, they're pretty common enough that everybody has some ideas to what they are, but they're not really as overpowered as a dragon. Yeah, that's it. So the next day, all I did was draw myself as, well, a sea serpent over and over again. And over 10 years later, it's still what people, even outside of the fandom, recognize me as. And you know what? I kind of like it that way. Now, as to how I met the Comfy CouchCast is a slightly less interesting story, but still pretty interesting nonetheless. I first met Random Harry, one of the members of the podcast at college, with one of my friends at the time named Acedia. We had run into him at the tail end of my junior year at art school, and somehow at least I had hardly noticed him until that point. Now, Acedia and I had been friends since my sophomore year. I consider her family I wish I was related to, so we share most of our thoughts together. Later that summer, however, I found out through Instagram that the two of them were together in a relationship, and while a little frustrated nobody told me, to this day I'm still really happy for the both of them. Later that fall, we all had begun to hang out more often with some of our other classmates on our off time, and by that winter, Random had overheard his internship at the time was looking for people and was interested in my work. We then became good colleagues as we worked on the same project together, and by the end of that spring, he had later invited me to his own personal Discord server. It was there that I met the majority of what is now the Comfy CouchCast in general. After interacting a bit more, one of his friends, Capit, had begun to look up to me as a mentor, which, up until this point, had never really occurred to me that someone would do that out of their own volition. Eventually, while interacting with more of Capit's peers, I was invited as a one-time guest on Comfy Couch, to which I suppose I must have done so well as a speaker that they wanted me to come back on a few more times. And then finally, in early February 2020, I was given an opportunity to host my own show under the Comfy Couch name, which is the one you're currently listening to now. Now, apologies for having this pilot episode be a tad shorter than the half hour I plan on, but fear not, some of the topics I wish to discuss may be interesting to you, and at the very least you'll have something you can look forward to in the near future. Some of these include improvements on minutiae of certain AAA video games, the follies of several entertainment companies that I have personal beefs with, discussions about art and my repertoire of my tools and other such topics, and then maybe later down the line, I would like to discuss fandom cultures and how they end up becoming a microcosm of much larger issues. I'm also considering having other peers and colleagues on as guests, but only if there's enough interest for them. For now, however, I plan to keep things fairly light and comical. As the next episode, I wish to discuss my personal disdain for a musical known as, well, I'll leave that to the airs of mystery. Keep you on your toes for a while. But for right now, the time being, thank you very much for tuning in, and if my ramblings so far have piqued your curiosity in any way, be sure to hit that bell down below in the dibbly-doo and subscribe and stay up to date. If you would like to follow me on other social platforms, I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. Most of those places I'm going to post either art, memes, or any other trash posts that I find amusing. Thank you very much for your time, and until next time, go chart those waters.